Welcome to the lecture on Chapter 12, Project Procurement Management. We're getting near the end of it. We got this chapter and one more, and we'll see what happens. So, Project Procurement Management, what is it? Well, it's kind of the process. How do I acquire the stuff that I'm going to do the projects with, whether it's in-house, outside source, just depends on where you're going to get the information. So other terms you could use is purchasing or it's outsourcing. But you can tell that in 2014, and this number's gone up, and that is from an IT perspective, we've outsourced a lot of information. So here we got the global IT industry is at $3.8 trillion. A large percentage of that is not done in the U.S. It's done someplace else. So from a global perspective, the question is, how do I start trying to bring IT back into the U.S.? Some people call it urban onshoring. I think it's just kind of a weird term, but it's trying to bring the information, get all these services back to the U.S. So you still got plenty of opportunities to have people in the U.S. do the work. Debates on whether I go out. Usually, what's the number one reason people outsource? It's cheaper. It's cheaper to go someplace else. Some companies like Walmart prefer not to outsource at anything. GM plans to switch from 90%, cutting it back to only 10%. So a lot of companies are saying, well, I'm finding that going someplace else to get a lot of our IT work done has not always been the cheapest. So we'll see. We'll see how that goes as time goes on. But it still continues. It still continues to grow because countries like India, China, the Philippines, Latin America growing in popularity, because these countries are not only are they trained, they're adding infrastructure to their countries, they're adding businesses, they're adding factories, they're adding employees, they're training their people for this one particular purpose. So there's a lot of focus on these other countries to develop their resources in-house or in-country to make it a viable product, because it is a major business for them. So why would I want to outsource? I mean, you want to outsource because you think that the skills and technologies are someplace else versus here. You want to reduce both your fixed and recurring costs. You think it's going to give you some flexibility. You think it's going to have increased accountability, but it also means with that increased accountability, if you don't manage it correctly, it can be a big pain. So when you do this, you form a contract, a mutually binding contract. We're going to talk about several different types of contracts, but it basically says here, this is what you're doing, how much you're going to do it for, and what are the penalties if you don't step up. So what are the steps, the major processes here you got in project procurement management of acquiring these goods and services both it says outside. Now it says outside the performing organization. So that doesn't mean I have to offshore all my work, but I could just decide that I'm not going to do it myself, but I want to do it someplace local in the United States. But I still have to procure or purchase those skills, whether I'm doing it from India or whether I'm doing it from Hickory. So it doesn't make any difference. Now, planning and procurement management, it's basically what? It's determining what to procure, when, how to do it, conducting it. So I'm going to obtain the seller's responsibles. So, I'm going to make a request. They're going to get the responses. I'm going to say, based on the 14 choices of sellers, I'm going to select one of them and the processes I'm going to do. and I'm going to award that contract. And of course, now once I've hired them, now I've got to manage that relationship. I've got to, how are they doing on the contract? I'm keeping track of the status of their activity, the quality of their work, all of that, controlling that purchase. And then, of course, what happens when it's all done, when the project's done, the agreement's done. So let's look at planning. Planning basically is what? Identify what the project needs and find the best way to decide where we're going to do it, whether we're going to use in-house or out of house, or inside or outside of the organization. If there's no need to buy any product or service outside, then I don't need to have a procurement management process. But if I need to come into an agreement with somebody else, I need to have a different kind of contract. I need to have a contract between me and who's going to provide that service, whether it's a service or a product. There's a couple of different options. You can have a fixed price or a lump sum contract. I can have a cost reimbursable. So, hey, you do what you want. Tell me what your costs are, and I'll pay them. Time and material. It's kind of a hybrid of between fixed price and a cost reimbursable contract. And I've used it a lot for consultants that I'll bring them in and say, okay, I need you for 6 months, and whatever you eat, your travel, room and board, meals, I'm going to pay for that. Or a unit price. Is it, okay, I'm going to pay you for, $100 per item, and based on how many of these items you sell, boom, so, but a single contract can actually have any one of these, so, or all of them, based on the different phase or parts of the project. Now, there's a thing called point of total assumption. It's a cost where the contractor says, hey, you eat all the remaining costs. So everything that's done. So that means you gave me a quote of $5,000, and it was a fixed cost. And when you go to 5,001, any dollar you spent after that becomes they lose money. Well, they probably lost money before that, but at point sometimes. Because you find some contractors that'll lowball you just to get their contract, willing to take this total point of assumption point in the hope that future business will come in. Now, there's several different cost reimbursable contract. There's a cost plus incentive fee. So I pay, based on if you had certain performance, you're going to get a predetermined fee and maybe incentive bonuses. There's a cost plus fixed fee. I'll pay you what of the performance is. And if you meet certain performance, you get the bonus. There could be a cost plus percentage cost, where the buyer pays the supplier allowable performance cost plus a percentage of total cost. Now, each one of these types has who's got the risk. Some of the buyers got some the sellers got some. So each one of these is a little bit different, and who takes the risk. Now, in your contract, you want to make sure there are specific clauses. Take into account, issues that come up to play. The biggest one is termination. Who can terminate my contract? Either the buyer or the supplier. What terms, and then what happens if that happens. So if I want to terminate too soon. Some of the tools for planning these purchases, sometimes expert judgment, sometimes market resale, and sometimes you're going to do a make or bias analysis. So you're going to do, your general management or your upper echelon of management is going to decide, is it better for the organization to build it in-house or to pay somebody else to do it? So you both have the risk, and you got to make that decision which way you're going to go. Now, the procurement management plan says, okay, it describes how this procurement process will be managed, what documentation for inside, outside prompted, the contract disclosure, and it varies based on what kind of project it is. Now, some of the terms is you could get a statement of work. Statement of work, it says, okay, it's a description of what is going to be done. It's used as part of the contract. and it may be called contract scope, statement of work, but it's basically what is going to be done. Not necessarily the how, but this is what I'm paying you for. This is what you're bidding against. Now, when I've decided what I want done, I will then say, hey, I want to give me a request for proposal. I want you to solicit a proposal. And a proposal is just a document prepared by the seller on different approaches that a company can meet my buyer's needs. Now, a request for quote is where I'm saying, hey, I want you to bid. Here's my scope of work. I want you to give me a price. What's going to take? How many people, time, money, all of that stuff is you're going to give me a cost that I can make a decision. Once I have those kind of, then I have to choose who I'm going to use. So based on this request for proposal or request for quote, I now have to look at and quantify which of these bids, which of these quotes was the best one. Which one looked good on paper, which one has the best means for us, and make that decision. But you got to make sure you can justify it, because you don't want to get legal coming down and saying, hey, you're colluding with somebody. So you got to make sure you understand what your decision base is, and you're going to do that, this criteria, before you send out your quote, so that everybody up front knows what's going on. And then I go, okay, fine. Now I got to conduct the procurements. I got to decide who to ask to do the work, send out the appropriate documentation, obtain the bids, select the contract, award the contract, different approaches for this. I can do a preferred vendor. Through the school, we got preferred vendors. Whether it's your approaches, where you can advertise for one. So sometimes you get conferences, a lot of different ways. Here's just an example of if I'm going to evaluate. This is where I says, this is what you're going to do, decide up front. You can say, based on you're going to identify certain criteria, you're going to give each one a weight. So as you score them, as you rate, like company X is the number one in technical, but number two in management approach. You're going to give each one of those a different rating, and then that should lead to one of these proposals being the best solution. Then you want to make sure it's okay. I got to make a selection. So based on the initialization, based on create a short list, maybe ask them for further information, put sellers on a short list, and then say, hey, give me a best and final offer. And then based on that, you're going to get a contract signed by the buyer and the seller. Of course, now that I got a contract, now I got to control this. So basically it says, hey, how am I going to manage our agreement long term? And sometimes as things change, you could get a change order. Yes, I contracted you for this. And on either side, somebody says, hey, this wasn't in my contract. I'm going to request a change request. And then you got to decide to say, who's going to do this? Am I going to willing to do it? Am I going to do it for the same fee? Is it going to be an upcharge? Whatever the case may be. But you want to make sure those are documented. Even though it can be verbal, I prefer to get it in writing so that everybody knows there's no surprises at the end. Different ways of controlling. You want to make sure that it's part of the project. And change control needs to be, especially the contract, needs to be reviewed, approved, and it can't just be the project manager. It's got to make sure that the parties to be, the leadership of the company, understand these are the changes I'm looking for, and why. Sometimes you can get yourself as a project manager in a lot of trouble and potentially terminated if you don't keep the right people informed. You want to make sure you got backups. You want to make sure you got certain tools, chain control system, performance reviews, audits, inspections on the work, making sure all that stuff comes up to needs. And then the question is, what happens when I'm done? What happens when the contract's done? I got to complete the project, settle up the cost, determine if the work's been corrected, completed, of course, update all the records, archive it, make sure everything else, because you want to make sure you've got all that. Now, some of the best practices, procurement can be more intelligent. There's a lot of tools out there, data scientists, behavioral and economists. I don't talk for a living, but there's a lot of different ways you can procure information. Now, there are tools out there to help close the contract. But the biggest thing is you want to make sure you know what's going to happen up front, when your contract's over, what records you're going to keep, what data you're going to keep, and go from there. There's different software out there that could be used, but in most cases, most of it's word processing and databases to keep track of suppliers, presentations, is the biggest thing. So in this chapter, we've talked about project procurement. It's basically acquiring goods and services, both outside the performing organization, not necessarily outside the United States, but it can. So it's how to plan it, how to conduct the procurements, how to control them once you got them, and then what happens when you close them. So hopefully that gives you a little idea of what's going on in this chapter, and I will see you next week. Oh, next week is spring break, so I'll see you in 2 weeks. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.